Richard Hale did not wake up to alarms. He woke up to silence. The kind of silence money buys when it builds walls thick enough to keep the world out. From the top floor of his penthouse, the city looked smaller than it should have, lights blinking like signals waiting for permission to move. Richard stood by the window, hands behind his back, watching traffic obey rules he never had to follow. For 30 years, he had learned one simple truth. Control does not shout. It arranges. He had arranged governments into cooperation, arranged banks into obedience, arranged competitors into partnerships they never wanted. And when arrangement failed, he replaced people. No scandal, no raised voice, just quiet exits. Men who crossed Richard Hale did not collapse publicly. They simply faded. Their companies sold cheaply. Their reputations thinned. Their names stopped opening doors. That was his power. Not fear, but inevitability. By 8 o'clock, messages were already waiting. Not requests. Updates. A merger approved in Frankfurt. A refinery dispute resolved in Lagos. A senator calling to check in. Richard ignored most of them. He had learned that responding too quickly trained people to expect access. And access, once expected, became weakness. He dressed with precision. Dark suit. Neutral tie. No colors that suggested mood. Mood was information. Information was leverage. Downstairs, his security detail moved without speaking. They had been trained not to announce presence. Only results. Richard passed them like furniture. Acknowledged, useful, unimportant. The elevator ride down was smooth, uninterrupted. In mirrors, his reflection looked exactly as it should. Controlled, composed, untouchable. But appearances, he knew, were the most expensive lies. At his office tower, the lobby froze the moment he entered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Assistants stood straighter. Executives checked posture. Richard noticed everything. Who avoided eye contact. Who smiled too fast. Who spoke too much. He had learned early that ambition leaked through behavior long before it showed up in numbers. In the boardroom, 12 men and women waited. All accomplished. All wealthy. All careful. The meeting began on time. It always did. They discussed projections, risks, strategies. Words like volatility and exposure floated across the table. Richard listened, nodding occasionally, saying very little. When someone suggested a compromise that would dilute control, Richard did not argue. He simply asked one question. Who benefits from this? Silence followed. He waited. When no one answered, he closed the file in front of him. Then we won't do it. The decision was final before it was finished being spoken. This was how Richard Hale ruled. Not through noise. Through gravity. After the meeting, his wife's name appeared on his phone. Victoria. He let it ring twice before answering. Long enough to remind her he was occupied. Short enough to avoid suspicion. Yes, he said. Her voice was calm, polished. The gala this evening. You're still attending? Of course, Richard replied. That was the agreement. Appear together. Smile appropriately. Maintain the image. Victoria understood appearances as well as he did. Perhaps better. She had been chosen for that reason. The marriage had been efficient, strategic, publicly admired, privately functional. They shared dinners, not conversations. Shared spaces, not thoughts. Shared a son, not values. Lucas. Richard's jaw tightened slightly at the thought. Lucas had potential. But potential without discipline was just entitlement wearing a suit. Richard had tried. Mentored quietly. Corrected discreetly. Shielded mistakes from exposure. But protection used too long turned into permission. And permission bred recklessness. By evening, the gala hall glowed with money and ambition. Richard and Victoria moved through the crowd like royalty, greeted, admired, photographed. People laughed at Richard's jokes even when they weren't funny, listened when he spoke even when he said nothing of importance. He felt none of it, because somewhere beneath the applause, beneath the deals and the praise, a discomfort pressed against him, a feeling he could not arrange away. Power had given him everything except peace. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, Richard stood once more by the window. The city blinked back at him, obedient and unaware. For the first time in years, he thought about something he rarely allowed himself to revisit. A woman who had spoken to him like he was ordinary, not impressed by power, not intimidated by wealth. She had entered his life through work, brought in to assess risks others ignored. She spoke plainly, saw danger early, never asked for access, but stayed because she saw him clearly. A life he had not been able to protect without destroying it. A secret he had buried so deeply it almost felt unreal. Almost. Richard exhaled slowly. Men like him did not get second chances. They got consequences, sometimes delayed, never denied. He turned away from the glass. And somewhere in the machinery of the empire he built, something shifted. The kind of shift no one noticed. Until it was too late. Richard Hale was found dead at 5:42 a.m. That detail would matter later. Not because of the time itself, but because of who was awake to receive the call and who wasn't. Richard Hale had lived with a managed heart condition for years, stable, controlled, predictable, until the night predictability failed him. The security team arrived first. They were trained for intrusions, not endings. They checked doors that had not been forced, windows that had not been opened, cameras that had not malfunctioned. Everything was in place. Two in place. Richard lay exactly where a man would lie if he had gone to bed expecting to wake up. No overturned furniture. No shattered glass. No signs of struggle. Just stillness. The doctor who pronounced him dead chose his words carefully. Cause of death pending investigation. That sentence is how professionals say we don't know yet without admitting uncertainty. By 6:30, the phones began to ring. Not family. Not friends. Institutions. Banks confirming exposure. Legal firms requesting instructions. Board members asking questions they pretended were condolences. By 7, the media found the building. Someone always leaks, especially when a man this powerful stops breathing. Cameras gathered outside the tower, lenses tilted upward like witnesses waiting for a confession. Reporters speculated softly at first, then more boldly as minutes passed without statements. Sources say. Unconfirmed reports suggest. Questions are being raised about. No one said murder. Not yet. The word hovered, unspoken, heavy. Inside the penthouse, Victoria Hale stood very still. She wore a robe that looked like grief would later look good in it. Her face was composed, but her hands betrayed her, fingers tightening, releasing, tightening again. She had learned long ago that panic showed weakness, and weakness invited predators. When the officer spoke, she listened. When the doctor spoke, she nodded. When someone asked if she needed anything, she said no. Victoria did not cry. Not because she didn't feel loss, but because she understood timing. Lucas arrived late. Not because he didn't care, but because he had learned that consequences were negotiable. He stood in the doorway, stunned in a way that looked more like disbelief than grief. He stared at his father's body as though expecting it to sit up and correct him. "This doesn't make sense," he said. It was the first honest thing he had said all morning. By 8:30, lawyers were present. Not summoned. They came. That alone raised eyebrows. Lawyers do not rush unless there is something to protect. The official statement went out just after 9. Billionaire businessman Richard Hale has passed away. Authorities are investigating the circumstances. The family requests privacy. Privacy was already gone. The markets reacted before emotions could catch up. Shares trembled. Partners hesitated. Rivals watched quietly, calculating. Richard Hale's death was not just personal. It was structural. By noon, speculation had replaced information. Some said heart failure. Others whispered poison. A few mentioned enemies whose names never appeared in print. Everyone agreed on one thing. Richard Hale had too many unfinished conflicts for his death to be simple. And then attention shifted. Not to how he died, but to what he left behind. A fortune layered with complexity. Companies within companies. Agreements that required his signature to stay stable. And one question, repeated in boardrooms and living rooms alike. Who controls everything now? In the Hale mansion, conversations grew quieter but sharper. Doors closed. Phones stayed face down. Because inheritance is not about grief. It is about positioning. Victoria understood this instinctively. Lucas felt it without understanding why. The will had not yet been read. But assumptions were already hardening. Richard Hale had a wife. He had a son. He had built an empire that bore their name. The rest felt like detail. By evening, the city had moved on to its next distraction. But inside the walls Richard Hale had built for protection, something dangerous was taking shape. Not sorrow. Not confusion. Expectation. And expectation, when it goes unmet, has a way of turning violent. The Hale mansion did not feel like a house in mourning. It felt like a headquarters. Staff moved quickly but quietly, trained to sense when silence was required. Curtains were drawn, not for grief, but for privacy. Phones rang in distant rooms and stopped abruptly when footsteps approached. Nothing was accidental. Victoria Hale sat at the long dining table with a cup of tea she had not touched. Across from her lay a leather folder, unopened, its edges perfectly aligned with the table. She did not need to open it yet. Timing mattered. Victoria had lived long enough beside Richard Hale to understand power. She knew grief had a window, and that window closed faster than people admitted. After that, control had to be re-established before others tried to take it. And others would try. By late afternoon, the calls had begun. Not condolences. Inquiries. A longtime board member wanted reassurance about continuity. A foreign partner wanted to check in. A legal advisor asked whether the will had been located. Victoria answered none of them directly. She listened, took notes, gave nothing away. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. Everything is under control. It was a statement, not a promise. Lucas paced the room like a man waiting for confirmation he already believed was guaranteed. He stopped occasionally to glance at the portraits on the wall, generations of men staring down from gilded frames. His father's portrait was still missing. It would be added soon. This shouldn't take long, Lucas said, breaking the silence. Once the will is read, we can start stabilizing things. Victoria looked at him carefully. Stability is not announced, she replied. It's demonstrated. Lucas scoffed lightly. I know how this works, Mother. I've been around it my whole life. That was precisely the problem. He had been around power without ever carrying its weight. Around decisions without bearing their consequences. Victoria knew this. Richard had known it too. But today was not the day to correct him. Lawyers arrived just before sunset. 2 senior partners from the firm Richard had trusted for years. They carried briefcases and expressions that revealed nothing. When they were shown into the private study, Victoria rose to greet them. No tears. No trembling. She shook hands like a woman preparing to receive what was already hers. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said. One of the lawyers nodded. Given the circumstances, it was necessary. Lucas leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. Confident. Impatient. "So," he said, "when do we begin?" The lawyers exchanged a brief look. "The will is sealed," the senior partner replied. "It will be read tomorrow morning in the presence of the board." Lucas smiled. "Of course it will," he said. The assumption hung in the air, unchallenged. After the lawyers left, Victoria closed the study door and turned to her son. "Do not speak carelessly tomorrow," she warned. "Let the process unfold." Lucas laughed softly. "Mother, please. This is just formality." Victoria did not laugh with him. She walked to the window and looked out at the darkening grounds. Reporters' vans were already lining the outer gates, their lights blinking patiently. Formality, she knew, was often where empires cracked. Still, she allowed herself a moment. Richard Hale had married her publicly, built the empire beside her, presented Lucas as heir. Whatever secrets he kept, whatever mistakes he made, there were limits. He would not humiliate them. Not in death. Not after everything they had represented together. That night, Victoria slept for the first time since the news broke. Lucas slept easily. In their separate rooms, each dreamed of continuity. Neither considered the possibility that Richard Hale had planned his final move not for peace, but for protection. And somewhere, inside a sealed document waiting for the morning, a name sat quietly on the page. A name that did not belong to the Hale mansion. A name that would turn assumption into chaos. The boardroom was already full when Victoria Hale arrived. Not full of people, full of expectation. 12 board members sat around the table, each in their usual seat, each pretending this was just another meeting. Their faces were composed, but their hands betrayed them, fingers tapping, pens aligning and realigning, documents opened and closed without being read. At the far end of the room, 2 lawyers stood beside a locked briefcase. The briefcase mattered more than anyone in the room. Victoria took her seat at the head of the table without asking permission. No one objected. Power, when established long enough, no longer required confirmation. Lucas sat to her right, relaxed, almost bored. He leaned back slightly, legs crossed, already imagining the next phase of his life. Interviews, announcements, the inevitable transition from son to successor. The senior partner cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he said. "We will proceed according to the instructions left by Richard Hale." He paused deliberately. Richard Hale's name still carried weight, even spoken in the past tense. The lawyer unlocked the briefcase and removed a thick envelope. It was sealed, untampered, witnessed. Every movement was slow. Not for drama. For legality. "Before I begin," the lawyer continued, "I must state that the contents of this will are final. No amendments were filed after its execution." Victoria nodded once. Expectant. Lucas checked his watch. The lawyer broke the seal. Paper slid against paper. The sound was louder than it should have been. "The will of Richard Hale," the lawyer began, "being of sound mind and body at the time of writing." The room faded into stillness. This was the part people pretended mattered. He continued reading through preliminary clauses, assets, holdings, trusts, legal structures. Names of companies filled the air, numbers that would have stunned anyone outside the room. No reactions yet. Everyone was waiting for the sentence that mattered. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Regarding the control and ownership of Hale Consolidated and its subsidiaries. Lucas sat forward. Victoria's grip tightened slightly around the armrest. Richard Hale directs that all voting rights, executive authority, and controlling interest be transferred in full to... The pause was unintentional, but it felt deliberate. To Ava. Silence fell, complete and absolute. Not the silence of shock. The silence of disbelief. Lucas laughed once. Reflexive. That's not funny, he said. Read it again. The lawyer did not look up. To Ava, he repeated. As named beneficiary. Victoria did not move. Her face remained composed, but something behind her eyes shifted. A recalibration, fast and sharp. Who? She asked calmly. The lawyer looked up now. Ava, he said. No surname listed here. A board member leaned forward. Is this a mistake? It is not, the lawyer replied. Lucas stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. My father would never. The will was drafted 3 years ago, the lawyer interrupted, his tone neutral. Reviewed twice. Signed, witnessed, and sealed. Victoria raised one hand. Lucas stopped speaking. Continue, she said. The lawyer nodded and went on. Richard Hale further directs that no portion of his personal estate, trusts, or corporate interests be transferred to Victoria Hale or Lucas Hale, except as previously stipulated in fixed allowances outlined in Schedule C. The words landed slowly. Fixed allowances. Not inheritance. Not control. Allowances. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Objections flew. Someone swore under their breath. Another demanded clarification. Victoria remained seated. Her heart did not race. Her mind did. She replayed years of dinners, conversations, silence, decisions she had dismissed as quirks. She had assumed permanence. That was her error. Lucas slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. My father. The lawyer closed the folder gently. The will is clear, he said. Any disputes will be handled through legal channels. Victoria stood. The room quieted instantly. This meeting is over, she said. She did not look at the lawyers. She did not look at the board. She looked straight ahead, already calculating damage control, already preparing for war. As she walked out, one thought cut through everything else. Richard Hale had not forgotten his family. He had excluded them. On purpose. And somewhere, in a place none of them had considered important enough to watch, someone named Ava was about to become the most dangerous person in their world. The boardroom emptied faster than it had filled. Not because people were finished speaking, but because silence had become uncomfortable. Board members avoided one another's eyes as they gathered their papers. Phones were already vibrating with messages that would not wait for elevators. Lawyers walked out together, speaking in low tones, already anticipating injunctions, petitions, and emergency meetings. The empire had not fallen, but it had tilted. Victoria Hale returned to the mansion in silence. The drive felt longer than usual. The gates opened automatically, as they always had, but today the sound grated. Familiar things have a way of becoming offensive the moment control slips. Inside, staff stood uncertainly, unsure which tone to adopt. Should they whisper? Should they proceed as usual? Should they pretend nothing had changed? Victoria dismissed them all with a glance. Lucas followed her into the private study, anger radiating off him like heat. This is a setup, he said. Someone forged that will. Someone manipulated him. Victoria poured herself a glass of water and took a measured sip before responding. Sit down, she said. Lucas did not sit. He humiliated us, he continued. After everything. He did not humiliate us, Victoria cut in calmly. He repositioned us. Lucas stared at her. What does that even mean? It means, she said, setting the glass down carefully, that your father made a decision he believed was necessary. Whether we like it or not. Lucas laughed sharply. Necessary for who? Some ghost named Ava. The name sounded foreign in his mouth. Insulting. Victoria did not answer immediately. She walked to the bookshelf, ran a finger along the spines, stopped at nothing in particular. Ava, she repeated softly. The name did not frighten her. The unknown did. By nightfall, the media had caught the scent. Headlines shifted from death to dispute. Analysts speculated on the stability of Hale Consolidated. Rivals released carefully worded statements expressing concern and confidence. Reporters camped outside the gates again, hungry now, not curious. Victoria watched them from the upper floor, expression unreadable. "They'll tear us apart if we don't control the narrative," Lucas said. "We need to challenge the will. Immediately." "And say what?" Victoria asked. "That Richard Hale lost his mind?" Lucas hesitated. "That he was manipulated," he offered. "That he was ill." Victoria turned to him slowly. "You don't accuse a man like your father of weakness unless you are prepared to prove it," she said. "And proof cuts both ways." Lucas clenched his jaw. "So we do nothing?" "No," she replied. "We verify." She reached for the phone. "Find out who Ava is," she instructed. Quietly. Thoroughly. Lucas frowned. "How?" Victoria met his gaze. "There is always a trail," she said. "People leave footprints long before they leave names." That night, in offices across the city, investigations began. Private firms were contacted. Old associates were questioned. Records were pulled, birth registries, employment histories, sealed files that had not been touched in decades. Most searches returned nothing, which only deepened the problem, because invisibility at that level was not accidental. It was engineered. Lucas paced as updates trickled in. No social footprint. No public records beyond basic employment. No obvious connections. Victoria listened, absorbing every word. A person without history was not harmless. They were protected. And protection always came from somewhere. By midnight, denial had given way to something sharper, fear. Richard Hale had not only left them out. He had prepared for them. And as the realization settled, one truth became unavoidable. This was not a mistake to be corrected. It was a move to be answered. Somewhere in the city, someone had been living quietly for 26 years, without knowing she was being watched, without knowing her name had just detonated an empire. The hunt had begun. By morning, the search had become organized. Not frantic. Not emotional. Professional. Victoria Hale did not shout orders. She did not threaten. She did not panic. She simply activated networks that had existed quietly for years. Favors owed, access granted, doors that only opened for certain names. Her instructions were precise. "Find her," she said. "Do not approach her. Do not alert her. And do not fail." The private investigation firm assigned to the task understood immediately that this was not a routine background check. This was a retrieval without noise. A discovery without fingerprints. They began where most people ended. Employment records. Rental histories. Utility bills. Government registries. Nothing remarkable surfaced. A woman named Ava existed, yes, but not in the way the will suggested she should. No property. No social presence. No education trail that led upward. She lived quietly. Moved rarely. Worked consistently. Invisible. "That's not normal," the lead investigator reported. "People don't disappear that completely unless they've been taught to." Victoria absorbed this in silence. Richard had always admired preparation. Lucas was less patient. "She's hiding," he snapped. "That's what this is." "No," Victoria replied calmly. "She doesn't know she needs to." That distinction mattered. By afternoon, fragments began to appear. An old foster record with multiple relocations. A caregiver who remembered a child who spoke little and watched too much. A school administrator who recalled a girl who never caused trouble, not because she was timid, but because she had learned early that attention invited consequences. Patterns formed. Ava had not been protected by wealth. She had been protected by absence. This wasn't an accident, one investigator said carefully. Someone structured her life to leave as little trace as possible. Victoria felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Richard had been thorough. Across the city, Lucas pushed harder. "Where is she now?" he demanded. The pause. "We have a possible location," came the reply. "Low profile. Ordinary." Ordinary? The word offended him. "How soon can you confirm?" he asked. "Already confirmed," the voice said. "She's still there." Lucas smiled. "Good," he said. "Then she's not as clever as she thinks." Victoria ended the call before he could say more. "She hasn't done anything wrong," Lucas protested. "She took what doesn't belong to her." "She took nothing," Victoria replied quietly. "Your father gave it." That silence between them was heavier than any argument. By evening, the first mistake was made. A junior associate, eager, careless, approached Ava's workplace under the guise of routine inquiry. No threats. No questions about inheritance. Just a presence that lingered too long. Long enough to be noticed. Ava did not react outwardly. She finished her shift, locked the door, walked home the same way she always had. But something shifted. For 26 years, she had survived by reading rooms, reading people, reading danger before it spoke. And tonight, danger had spoken softly. She did not know why. She did not know how. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Someone had started looking for her. And when people with power begin to search, they do not stop out of curiosity. They stop when they find what they want, or when they eliminate the problem. In the Hale mansion, Victoria stood alone in the study, staring at a name written on a page. Ava. Richard Hale had not chosen her randomly. He had chosen her because he believed she would survive what came next. Victoria closed the file. "Find her," she said again. "But this time, be careful." Because the hunt had already drawn blood. And the person they were searching for had no idea. She was standing at the edge of a world that did not forgive weakness. Ava did not panic. Panic was loud, and loud things attracted attention. She finished washing the last cup, wiped the counter twice the way she always did, and turned off the lights at exactly the same time as every other night. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. But something had. For the first time in years, the feeling she had learned to trust more than logic pressed firmly against her ribs. She was being noticed. Ava was 26 years old, and invisibility had been her greatest skill. Not because she was timid, not because she lacked ambition, but because life had taught her early that attention came with consequences she could not afford. She walked home the same route she always took. No shortcuts. No detours. Patterns were safer than improvisation. Her apartment was small, clean, and deliberately forgettable. No photographs on the walls. No documents left open. No objects that invited curiosity. Everything she owned could fit into 2 suitcases. That was not accident. That was training. She locked the door, leaned against it briefly, and listened. Silence. Still, she checked the window. Then the bathroom. Then the hallway again. The routine was automatic, practiced long before she had words for it. Only when she was sure she was alone did she allow herself to sit. Ava had grown up moving. Not dramatically. Not fleeing. Just relocating. Foster homes that never lasted long enough to form attachment. Caregivers who remembered her as easy because she asked for nothing and complained about nothing. Teachers who praised her discipline without ever knowing where it came from. She learned early that adults relaxed around children who did not demand. So she became that child. She learned to observe before speaking, to read faces, to anticipate moods, to leave rooms quietly when tension thickened. While other children learned confidence, Ava learned survival. By 13, she understood something most people never consciously learn. Safety was temporary. By 16, she was working. By 18, she was independent in name only, still living lightly, still leaving no trace. She did not dream extravagantly. Dreams required belief, and belief required stability. Instead, she planned. She planned meals, routes, expenses, conversations. And she planned for disappearance, just in case. Tonight, as she sat on the edge of her bed, that old instinct returned sharper than it had in years. Someone had looked at her today. Not the way customers looked. Not the way coworkers glanced. This had been deliberate. Professional. She did not know who. She did not know why. But she knew enough to understand this. Her quiet life had been interrupted. Across the city, in a place Ava had never seen, her name sat inside files thicker than her entire history. And in another place still, far removed from mansions and boardrooms, a woman watched the news with trembling hands. She recognized the name before the reporters finished speaking. Richard Hale was dead. And Ava had been named. The woman turned off the television, heart pounding not with relief, but with fear she had carried for decades. The thing she had run from had finally caught up. And this time, it had found her daughter. Ava's earliest memories were not of faces. They were of hands. Hands that packed bags quickly. Hands that buttoned coats without fuss. Hands that pointed instead of pulling. She remembered being told to wait. Not shouted. Not rushed. She learned to wait well. There had been a woman once. Ava did not remember her clearly, only fragments that time refused to erase. A calm voice. A steady presence. A rule repeated often, don't draw attention. The woman never stayed long enough for neighbors to learn her name. Never raised her voice. Never lingered in public places. When she spoke, it was measured, deliberate, as though every word had been weighed before release. Ava did not know then that this was fear-wearing discipline. She only knew that sometimes, in the middle of the night, they would leave. No arguments. No explanations. Just movement. By the time Ava was old enough to ask questions, the woman had already begun preparing her for absence. If someone asks too much, she would say, "You don't answer everything." If something feels wrong, she would add, "You trust that feeling." Ava followed rules easily. Children do when rules make the world feel predictable. The last night they spent together, the woman packed quietly while Ava pretended to sleep. She kissed Ava's forehead longer than usual. Her hands trembled slightly. In the morning, she was gone. There was no note. No goodbye that could be traced. Ava was told she would be cared for. And she was. Just not by the person who had taught her how to survive. The years that followed blurred into transitions. Homes that felt temporary before she even stepped inside. Adults who tried kindness but never stayed long enough to understand her. Files that followed her instead of memories. Ava adapted. She learned not to ask where she would be next. Learned not to decorate rooms. Learned not to attach. Because attachment hurt. Because attachment made leaving louder. By the time she reached adulthood, Ava had internalized the lesson completely. Silence was safer than explanation. Distance was protection. She never searched for the woman who had disappeared. Not because she didn't care, but because some absences felt intentional, and questioning them felt dangerous. Far away, Under a name that was no longer hers, the woman watched life unfold in fragments. She followed rules too. She did not visit. She did not write. She did not reach out. She worked ordinary jobs in ordinary places, changing locations just often enough to remain forgettable. She watched news quietly, avoided anything connected to Richard Hale's world. Every decision she made had one goal: keep Ava invisible. And for 26 years, it worked. Until the day a sealed envelope was opened. Until the day power remembered a name it had buried. The woman sat alone, gripping the edge of a table she had bought secondhand years ago. She whispered Ava's name once, softly, like a prayer that might still be overheard. She had always known this moment would come. She had just hoped it would come later. The knock came 3 days later. Not loud. Not urgent. Polite. Ava stood on the other side of the door for several seconds before responding. She had learned that people who mattered did not rush. People who rushed wanted something. She checked the peephole. A man stood there alone. Mid-40s. Well-dressed but not flashy. Hands visible. No impatience in his posture. Professional. She opened the door halfway. "Yes?" she asked. "My name is Daniel Ross," the man said evenly. "I'm a legal representative. I believe we need to talk." Ava did not step aside. "About what?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. "About your name," he said. The hallway felt suddenly smaller. Ava's grip tightened on the doorframe. "You have the wrong person." Daniel nodded slightly, as though he had expected this. "That's what everyone says at first," he replied. "May I come in?" "No." Daniel did not push. "That's fair," he said. "Then I'll say this here. Richard Hale named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate." Silence. Not the stunned kind. The careful kind. "That's not possible," Ava said. "I'm afraid it is." She studied him closely now. His tone was calm, but there was weight behind his words, the kind that came from documents, not opinions. "I don't know Richard Hale," she said. Daniel met her gaze. "He knew you." That sentence landed differently. Ava closed the door. She leaned against it, heart steady, mind racing. This was not panic. This was calculation. After a moment, she opened it again. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "And you stay there." Daniel smiled faintly. "Understood." He explained carefully, slowly, as if delivering news that could fracture someone if handled roughly. The will. The boardroom. The challenge already forming. Ava listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Why me?" Daniel exhaled. "Because he trusted you." "That's not an answer," she said. "It's the only one he left," Daniel replied. Ava looked past him, down the hallway, already thinking in exits and contingencies. "I want nothing," she said finally. "Tell them that." Daniel's expression shifted, not surprise, but concern. "That may not be an option," he said quietly. "They're already looking for you." That word again. Looking. Ava felt it settle in her chest, cold and familiar. "How did you find me?" she asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. "Because someone else already did," he said. The truth slid into place. The lingering gaze at work. The unease. The instinct she trusted. Her life had not been interrupted by coincidence. It had been discovered. That night, Ava sat alone, lights off, phone untouched. For 26 years, she had lived by one rule. Stay invisible. Now, the most powerful man in the country had torn that rule apart, even in death. And somewhere beyond her walls, people who believed power belonged to them were deciding what to do about a woman who was never supposed to exist. Daniel returned the next evening. Not to the door. Inside. Ava had allowed it after 24 hours of silence, 24 hours of reading the same lines in her head and rejecting every explanation she did not yet trust. Daniel placed a slim folder on the table between them and did not push it toward her. "You don't have to read it now," he said. "You don't have to read it at all." Ava folded her arms. "Then why bring it?" "Because it belongs to you," Daniel replied. "And because it explains things I shouldn't explain for him." That sentence landed heavier than the inheritance. Daniel spoke slowly, choosing precision over comfort. Richard Hale had known about Ava from the beginning. Not immediately, but early enough to understand the risk. He had not been absent out of indifference. He had been distant out of calculation. There were threats. Not loud ones. The kind that arrive as advice. Warnings disguised as concern. A child tied publicly to Richard Hale would not grow up quietly. She would grow up exposed. So Richard made a decision no father should have to make. He protected Ava by staying away. He financed stability anonymously. Arranged safe transitions. Ensured the woman who raised her could disappear completely when the danger sharpened. Daniel stopped there. "Your mother is alive," he said. "She chose disappearance over proximity." Richard respected that. Ava looked down. She had not cried when he said it, but something in her loosened, painfully, suddenly. Daniel slid the folder closer now. "This," he said, "is from him. Written 3 years ago. Updated once. Not for lawyers. Not for the board. For you." Ava did not open it immediately. She had learned early that words could rearrange a life. And once rearranged, there was no putting it back. When she finally did, the handwriting was precise. Controlled. But the restraint did not hide the weight. Richard's letter. "Ava, if you are reading this, then I have failed at the one thing I hoped would never be required. I stayed away not because you were unwanted, but because you were invaluable. Everything around me attracts attention. Attention invites damage. I gave you distance instead of danger. I did not raise you. That is my greatest regret. But I protected you. That was my responsibility. Marriage would have made you visible. Visibility would have destroyed you. I waited until death because it is the only moment power releases its grip. While alive, every move I made was watched. In death, I am finally free to act. You owe my family nothing. You owe the empire nothing. What I left you is not a gift. It is a safeguard. Do not be loud. Do not be reckless. Observe first. Decide later. And know this. You were never invisible to me. Richard Hale." Ava read the letter twice. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she needed to feel its weight settle before trusting herself to move. When she finally looked up, her voice was steady, but changed. "He didn't want me to fight them," she said. "No," Daniel agreed. "He wanted you to survive them." Ava closed the folder carefully. That night, when she packed, it was different. Not escape. Preparation. She wasn't packing to confront power. She was packing to enter it without losing herself. And for the first time in her life, Ava understood why silence had always felt like armor. It hadn't been absence. It had been protection. Prepared. Ava arrived without ceremony. No press. No announcement. No expectation of welcome. Daniel escorted her through a side entrance used only for private meetings. The hallways were long, polished, and intentionally intimidating, designed to remind visitors that decisions made here did not ask for consent. Ava noticed everything. The way assistants avoided eye contact. The way voices lowered as doors closed behind her. The way people glanced once, then looked away. She was not recognized. She was measured. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere shifted subtly when she entered, not with shock, but with curiosity sharpened by resentment. Victoria Hale was already seated. So was Lucas. Ava paused at the doorway, not out of hesitation, but assessment. Then she walked in and took the nearest open seat, not the head of the table, not the center. Neutral ground. No one spoke at first. Victoria studied her with the same attention she reserved for high-risk negotiations. This was not the reaction of a woman insulted, it was the reaction of a woman recalculating. Lucas, however, could not contain himself. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this is her." Ava did not respond. She looked at Daniel instead. "I'm here to listen," she said calmly. The simplicity unsettled them more than confidence would have. Victoria folded her hands. "You understand why this meeting was requested?" "Yes," Ava replied. "You also understand that you are standing on very unstable ground." Ava nodded. "I've lived on unstable ground most of my life." Lucas scoffed. "You think that qualifies you to sit here?" Ava met his gaze briefly, not challengingly, not defensively. "No," she said. "I think the will does." Silence followed. Not tense. Evaluative. Victoria leaned forward slightly. "What is it you want?" Ava considered the question carefully. "I want access to information," she said. "Nothing more." "Not yet." Lucas laughed sharply. "You expect us to just hand over?" "I expect nothing," Ava interrupted gently. "I'm not here to take control. I'm here to understand what I've been given." That stopped him. Victoria watched closely now. "You're aware," Victoria said, "that this empire was built with family." Ava nodded. "Yes." "And yet," Victoria continued, "Richard chose not to leave it to us." Ava did not rush to defend him. "I can't speak for his marriage," she said, "or for his parenting choices. I can only speak for the instructions he left." She slid a copy of the will summary onto the table. "I intend to follow them carefully." Lucas leaned forward. "You don't belong here." Ava looked at him again, longer this time. "I agree," she said, "which is why I won't pretend to." That answer unsettled the room. She stood. "I'll return when I've reviewed the records," she said. "Until then, I suggest we all avoid making decisions we'll later regret." She paused, then added quietly, "My father valued preparation. I do too." She left without waiting for permission. In the hallway, Daniel exhaled slowly. "You didn't confront them," he said. Ava shook her head. "There was nothing to confront yet." "And when there is?" She answered without looking back. "Then I'll be ready." The first sign came quietly. Too quietly. 3 days after Ava's visit to the boardroom, a routine audit request was denied. Not delayed. Not questioned. Denied. Daniel noticed it immediately. "That's unusual," he said, scanning the response on his tablet. "These records are protected, but not inaccessible." Ava did not react outwardly. "Who has the authority to block it?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. "One person," he said. "Outside the board. Outside the family." Ava waited. Marcus Klein. The name meant nothing to her. But the way Daniel said it meant everything. Marcus Klein had never been photographed beside Richard Hale. He had never attended galas. Never given interviews. Never needed recognition. He was the man behind structures. The one who made problems disappear quietly. The one Richard trusted when power needed to move without fingerprints. "He was your father's enforcer?" Ava asked. "Fixer," Daniel corrected. "Strategist. Guardian in his own way." Ava absorbed this. "And now?" Daniel exhaled. "Now he's gone silent." Silence again. It was always silence. By evening, Ava received her first warning. Not a threat. A reminder. A restricted bank account, one Richard had quietly used to fund certain protections, was frozen without explanation. The justification was bureaucratic, temporary, reversible. But the message was clear. I see you. Ava sat still as Daniel spoke. She did not interrupt. Marcus Klein believes, Daniel continued, that Richards will destabilize everything he spent decades controlling. Controlling for whom? Ava asked. Daniel looked at her carefully. For Richard, he said, and for himself. Daniel spoke quietly, more to himself than to Ava. Marcus never removed anything, he said. He delayed it. Ava looked up. Systems fail quietly, Daniel added, when time is manipulated. That night, in a small apartment far from the city's attention, a woman listened to a knock she had feared for years. She did not answer it. She did not need to. The man outside did not knock again. He slipped an envelope under the door and walked away. Inside was a single line. It's begun. The woman sat down slowly. Marcus Klein had found her, which meant Richard's protection had finally expired. Back at Hale Consolidated, Victoria received a visit of her own. Marcus did not sit when offered a chair. You and your son are making noise, he said calmly. Noise attracts scrutiny. Victoria bristled. My husband is dead. I will not be managed. Marcus met her gaze evenly. You never were, he said. You were tolerated. The words landed with surgical precision. I kept this empire stable while Richard indulged sentiment, Marcus continued. And now sentiment has been written into law. Victoria's voice was sharp. That sentiment is a stranger. Marcus turned toward the window. She is his contingency, he said. And contingencies threaten systems. So what do you want? Victoria asked. Marcus looked back. I want what Richard wanted, he replied. Control without exposure. At that moment, in 3 different places, the same truth settled into place. This was never about family. It was never about money. It was about control. Richard Hale had built a system powerful enough to outlive him. But he had also built it around a man who believed the system belonged to him. And now that man was moving. Ava felt it before she could explain it. This wasn't a fight she could win by patience alone. Some enemies did not argue. They erased. She picked up the phone. Daniel, she said calmly, I think it's time I learned everything my father was hiding. Across the city, her mother burned the envelope in the sink, hands steady despite the fear pressing against her chest. She had stayed hidden long enough. Because this time, disappearing again would not save Ava. Ava did not move quickly. That was the first mistake Marcus Klein made. He expected reaction. A defensive scramble. Instead, Ava did what she had been trained to do since childhood. She observed. Daniel laid out everything Richard Hale had hidden in layers. Not secrets, but redundancies. Secondary trustees. Time-locked authorizations. Instructions that only activated if specific patterns appeared. Richard had never trusted power without backup. He anticipated this, Ava said quietly. Yes, Daniel replied. But he also knew Marcus would think he'd won. That was the opening. They let Marcus tighten his grip. Accounts remained frozen. Records stayed blocked. Pressure mounted quietly inside the company. Marcus began making adjustments, small at first. Shifting authority. Reassigning oversight. Moving pieces into positions that felt permanent. Every move left a mark. Richard had known something Marcus did not. Men who believe they are invisible stop covering their tracks. Ava requested a single thing. A closed-door board session. No press. No family. Just records. Victoria attended reluctantly. Lucas arrived irritated. Marcus arrived confident. The room felt different this time. Ava did not sit. She stood at the end of the table, documents already arranged. "I asked for this meeting," she said calmly, "because certain actions have been taken without authorization." Marcus smiled faintly. "This company needs stability." "So did my father," Ava replied, "which is why he documented everything." Daniel activated the screen. Timelines appeared. Transfers. Overrides. Blocked audits. Not accusations. Evidence. The board leaned forward slowly. Marcus's expression did not change, not yet. "You're misinterpreting structural authority," he said. "Richard delegated." "No," Ava interrupted gently. "He prepared." She clicked once more. A recorded directive began to play. Richard's voice, steady, unmistakable. "If you are hearing this, then the contingency has been triggered, which means someone believed control belonged to them rather than the system." Silence tightened. Marcus stiffened. Richard's voice continued. "Any attempt to override these safeguards without unanimous board consent constitutes breach of trust and activates automatic disclosure protocols." Ava looked directly at Marcus. "You didn't know," she said, "because he never told you everything." The room shifted decisively. Board members exchanged looks. Phones buzzed. Legal consequences assembled themselves quietly in the air. Marcus spoke slowly now. "You think this ends me?" Ava met his gaze, not triumphantly, not angrily. "I think," she said, "that my father understood you better than you understood him." Daniel closed the file. By evening, investigations had begun. Not public yet, but irreversible. Marcus Klein left the building without protest. That was his second mistake. Power does not forgive exposure. Later that night, Ava stood alone in the office Richard had once used, the one no one had touched since his death. She did not sit at his desk. She stood beside it. She was not here to replace him. She was here to correct the imbalance he had left behind. Across the city, a woman stepped out of hiding for the first time in decades. Her name was no longer the one she had been born with. But her purpose was unchanged. It was time to protect her daughter openly. Marcus Klein's fall did not make headlines immediately. Men like him do not collapse publicly at first. They unravel behind closed doors, through subpoenas, sealed indictments, and board resignations announced with carefully chosen words. By the time the news reached the public, the narrative had already been decided. Former Hale advisor under investigation. Internal restructuring at Hale Consolidated. Board votes unanimously for transparency reforms. No mention of betrayal. No mention of manipulation. No mention of how close the empire had come to being quietly stolen. Victoria watched the coverage from the same mansion where she had once assumed permanence. She did not rage. She did not fight. For the first time, she saw Richard's final move clearly. This had never been about punishing her. It had been about removing risk. Lucas struggled longer. Entitlement does not dissolve easily. But stripped of protection, stripped of assumptions, he was forced to confront a truth he had avoided his entire life. Inheritance is not the same as readiness. Weeks later, Ava took her seat at the head of the table, not ceremoniously, not triumphantly. Simply because the work required it. She spoke less than anyone else. Listened more. Asked questions that revealed gaps no one wanted exposed. The empire stabilized. Not louder. Smarter. One evening, long after the last meeting ended, Ava received a message Daniel had been holding back. "There's someone who wants to see you," he said carefully. Ava already knew. They met in a quiet place. Neutral. Unremarkable. Safe. The woman stood when Ava entered. No rush. No tears at first, just recognition. Years of restraint sat between them, heavy, practiced, familiar. You grew into yourself, the woman said softly. Ava swallowed. You watched. I never stopped, her mother replied. They did not embrace immediately. This was not that kind of reunion. They spoke slowly, carefully, filling gaps without reopening wounds, explaining absences that had once felt like abandonment. I stayed away because being near you would have made you visible, her mother said, and visibility would have destroyed you. Ava nodded. I understand now, she replied. They sat in silence afterward, not awkward, not strained, earned. Later, alone in Richard Hale's office, Ava stood once more by the window he had favored. The city still blinked below. Still loud. Still hungry. But it no longer intimidated her. Richard Hale had not left her power. He had left her choice. A choice to rule differently. To protect quietly. To remember that silence, when chosen, could be strength. Ava turned off the lights and walked out. The empire would continue, but it would never again confuse control with ownership. Some inherit wealth. Others inherit responsibility. Ava Hale inherited survival and turned it into balance.